Welcome to the Legendary Leadership Summit 2019 with Cody, Dakota, Wooten.
We've got Aisha Wardi with us right now. She's a John Maxwell certified coach, trainer, speaker, and she aids in transforming individuals and organizations by helping them develop their leadership skills through one-on-one coaching, training, and motivational speaking, as well as with mastermind groups. Aisha's got her graduate degree in leadership, and she majored in organizational communications. Aisha, welcome to the Legendary Leadership Summit.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here because you've got what I believe to be an absolutely amazing story that can provide so much value, not just to people in general, but especially timely because of the conditions of the world today that we're in. And so we're going to be talking about with, not against you, strength and diversity. And so what makes you qualified to be talking about diversity, Aisha?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm from the Middle East and I moved here to Boston. And well, in my mind, moving here to the States, I believe that it would create opportunities for me, in terms of developing myself individually and career-wise. And I knew that it wasn't going to happen instantaneously, but I believe that being prepared was going to be enough. And I'm not the type of person that takes unstudied steps. I mean, I take risks, a lot of them, but I plan them, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
And so prior to moving to the States, it was like months of planning, researching, reaching out to people. And I would be lying if I said that I wasn't scared. I was scared. But before taking those steps, I had planned all the networking events I would be attending, all the people I'll be reaching out to, all the different organizations and individuals that I was considering partnering and collaborating with. I had printed business cards. I had set up meetings for my whole first month of being here. And yes. And I actually gave out my first business card in the airport when I landed to a potential client. And I attended my first networking event even before having a bed. So I was not going to waste my time. I was ready for business.
You were you were a girl with a mission and you were going to get it done.
Yes. But then things were not like what I expected them to be. So.
Okay, so what happened? What happened from having all this plan? You've got a month plus worth of business stuff going on that's going to set you up to hit it big in the US as soon as you get here. What happens between the end of that plan and finally getting here?
So honestly, I knew that was never going to be easy. I knew that I would have to hustle. I just didn't expect it to be this much of a hustle, and I expected it to pay off way earlier. It took much longer, and I didn't know that I would continuously have to prove myself and my qualifications to people, especially to people that were clearly less qualified than I am. Honestly, it has to be said. So I mean, I came in believing that being prepared would be enough, and I didn't know, maybe it was a bit naive from my side, but I thought that coming in with an undergraduate degree, a graduate degree, a coaching and training certification, and 5 years of work experience would get me through the door. I thought I was all set. I have never been more wrong in my life.
Why do you say that?
I mean, I faced a lot of issues, and I feel like people aren't ready to give people a chance when they come from a different cultural background. They just assume that they're less qualified.
Gotcha. So would you say that there was a bit of a culture shock in that respect then?
Yes, but I feel like the most shocking part for me was how different people are in the work environment than in general. Because I actually lived here for 2 years doing my graduate degree, and I never faced any sort of racism, sexism, ageism, or anything in particularly that's shocking. I actually even remember when I was in graduate school, in one of my classes, our professor asked us to discuss issues of women being in leadership and how difficult it is for women to be in leadership. And I remember being so confused, and I was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. I can't relate to this because in my country, there's women in all different leadership positions, and it just doesn't make sense. But now I can clearly see it and understand what they're talking about. And just being a woman in leadership is different, but being a woman from a different cultural background is a whole different story too.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's very timely right now that we're talking about women in leadership and people from different nations, especially in today's world, what we're going through right now between
Yeah.
all sorts of different areas, some which I'm not going to talk about for reason, because there's all sorts of debate that'll come from that. And that's not what we're looking to do. We're looking for understanding. Right. So one of the challenges you saw from going from your home to here was that there were a lot more women in leadership where you're from versus here.
Yes.
What are some of the other challenges that you saw and things that kind of differed from one to the other?
I feel like people here focus on age a lot. They think that with age comes more experience and comes more qualifications. And you can't argue that age does have its experience, but that doesn't mean that you just completely shut out anyone that does not fit your criteria.
I know exactly what you mean because I'm what you would say on the younger end, and there's definitely a lot that I've had to do in order to make a name for myself to get clients to be able to really start a business. And
Yeah.
people tend to have a look when they see someone younger than them and think, who are you? What right do you have to say anything? And what I think is kind of crazy is what we're seeing a lot in the younger generation is they're really advanced. The ability to learn and the opportunity to learn has dramatically increased to the point where some of the younger generations are quickly outpacing older generations. And it's kind of sad to watch younger generations struggle knowing they have ability, but not being seen for their ability.
Yeah. Well, it could possibly be seen as like the older generation feeling threatened by the younger generation too, or just not wanting them to, in our case, coach them. Because they're like, we have 15 or 20 years of experience in the business world. Who are you to coach me? And that's actually very interesting because in my first networking event, I walked through the door and I saw this guy and he was like, so tell me about you. What do you do? And I started talking. 5 minutes in, he stopped me. He was like, wait, how old are you again? And I was taken aback and I was like, how is that even relevant? Why does it matter? Does it matter? And he was like, yes, it matters. But I mean, I could be working since I was 16, right? How do you know? And it made me think, would he ask a male that question? So
Definitely.
one of the things that I face.
Absolutely. And that happens a lot. And I mean, I started working when I was 10 or 12 years old, somewhere in there. And so like I've got significant work history under my belt. It wasn't always corporate work history, but there's
Good.
that built up history there. People are starting younger and younger to work, which is funny because at least in the United States, we have laws against that technically, but that's a whole different story. But like what other things were you facing?
Um, mostly stereotypes. And I mean, it's that same guy I was talking to, and he could tell that I was Middle Eastern, and just small random things. He would see my rings, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you Middle Easterns love your gold," and he would just assume that I'm like a privileged individual and things like that. And then he asked me where I've traveled to, because he was like, "Oh, you must have traveled a lot," and I told him where I've been, and then I asked him, "What about you?" And he said, "Oh, no, I don't even have a passport. I'd like to keep my head on." and,
Did he actually say that?
yes, yes.
That's
In
awful. That's
actual
terrible.
words, yes. And I was so shocked. I didn't even know how to respond to that. And that was my first networking event, by the way. I was coming in all hopeful and, like ready for business. And that was the first experience I had. And I was like, wow, okay, this might not be as easy as I expected it to be. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, it's not like people in the Middle East are all homicidal maniacs. Like to assume that just by traveling over there, someone's going to chop your head. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
No one should be thinking like that.
I mean, we have the media, so,
Well, and that's actually a really interesting point, because the media does have a tendency to skew everything towards the negative.
Right.
And you can't say that what you see in the media is all of the truth. And yet we're seeing, even in society here, where we're supposed to be enlightened individuals and things like that, something that's so obviously unenlightened.
Yeah, and especially if you're going to be in the business world, then you have to be someone that's open-minded, someone that can communicate with people, and someone that's very careful with what they say, because you're not just representing yourself, you're representing your business, your organization, and, if you're a coach, you're representing coaches, and that's just not how it works. It's just the wrong way to start a business.
Well, not only that, but I mean, if you say stuff like that to clients, there's a likelihood that you're going to get sued and that someone is going to take legal action against you for discrimination and something like that. That's a very real thing that happens and puts people out of business.
Mm-hmm. And he did, by the way, contact me and wanted to do business. That after that, I was like, no, you're not someone that I would like to do business with. So he actually ruined his own opportunity without even realizing it. He didn't even realize that he said something that he shouldn't be saying. And that's the bigger issue.
It's a huge issue in today's world, because there's a lot of people who think they know exactly what they're saying, and come to find out they have no idea what they just unleashed in the words they said.
Yes. I mean, during May, we had Ramadan, the month where we're fasting.
Mm-hmm.
And in my workspace, someone offered me water, and I told him that I'm fasting. And he said, well, surely you can have water. And I said, no, I can't. And he said, well, I don't care what anyone says. Your Prophet Muhammad is a sadist, and this is just messed up. There are very few moments in my life where I am speechless. No, I was speechless. What do you say to that? Really, what do you just say to that?
I would have no idea what to say to that, because that's ridiculous to call someone else's faith out like that. It's
especially when you know nothing about it.
Yeah, exactly. Because most people sadly don't know much about any faith other than the one they typically have or the one they grew up with. And that's the only one they know anything about. And then they come to have preconceived notions like that.
Yeah, and it's not like I asked you to fast or do anything with me,
Exactly.
I understand why, like, it's not like I'm harming you in any way.
Exactly.
Keep your opinion to yourself.
Well, and like, it's one thing to have a discussion about someone else's faith,
right,
and to have questions about it. It's another thing to full out attack and make assumptions around it.
exactly, because I'm very open to discussions. I'm not the kind of person that gets offended easily, you know. If you talk to me, I will answer your questions, even if it causes me discomfort, you know. It's a
Absolutely.
conversation. At least I know that you're interested in learning.
Exactly. And I think that's actually really important, and it's something that I've seen missing in the United States. It's
Yeah.
that desire to actually learn more than what you already know.
Yes. Ignorance is bliss, right?
You could say ignorance is bliss, but I also would say that ignorance is just ignorance, and what you don't know, you need to know.
Yes. That's so true.
Definitely. So what else was there? What other kinds of things were you facing?
Um, Besides sexism, ageism, and racism, I feel like also another thing is that leaders here don't really see people from outside the US as qualified as they are. I mean, my 5 years of work experience doesn't count. And I actually was told that by a recruiter. She told me that employers in the US don't really consider work experience outside the US as experience. I don't know if they don't consider it as strong enough or as valuable enough, but excuse my French, that's bullshit. It's just another way to express racism.
I would definitely agree with that. There is, and see, there's a difference between the a quality of a job and a quality of a person as well. And
Right.
you can't determine the quality of a person just based on what a piece of paper says. And you can't determine the quality of a job based on what a piece of paper says. If you want to understand the quality of the person and you want to understand the quality of their experience, you're not going to get it from a piece of paper.
Unfortunately, that piece of paper is what gets you through the door.
Which is so sad. Like that
Yeah, it
saddens
is.
me, because it makes me wonder how many extremely qualified individuals automatically are disqualified from a process just because of a sheet of paper.
Yeah, too many, unfortunately.
Was there anything else that you were experiencing during that time that we haven't touched on?
It's mostly that.
Gotcha. So then the question becomes, actually I have one other question, because I know a little bit about you and your story. You've been back home as well. You've gone from here to you've gone from your home to the United States, back home, and you've been back and forth a few different times.
Yes.
What was the experience going back home after that?
After my graduate degree,
Well, and working here and noticing differences in the culture.
um, honestly, it's interesting because seeing both worlds, a lot of people think that women in the Middle East are oppressed.
It's
And that
definitely
is
something I've heard before.
and that is so far from wrong because my country actually paid for my studies, you know, in my graduate school. And they don't care what gender you are. You are hired based on your qualifications, you know? And we always had same pay, equal pay, which a lot of people here don't know about. And then moving from having that all my life to coming here, I expected a lot more, maybe. And I was shocked, to be honest. And then, oh, actually, that reminds me of a story.
Okay.
I remember discussing this with someone who was telling me about the American dream. And I told him that it's harder than I thought it would be. And he straight up said, then go back home if you don't believe in the American dream. And I said, we're having a discussion here. I was confused. Like, where did that come from? I was trying to make a point. I feel like a lot of people here avoid these conversations, which is an issue. How do you grow if you just avoid everything, if you don't talk about these topics? It's just impossible. You can't just ignore a problem away, Just because you don't talk about it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Exactly. And what typically happens is the more you ignore it, the worse it gets,
Exactly.
until it blows up in your face. That's why in American culture right now, one of the things that we're facing is a whole bunch of things around sexual harassment. The whole Me Too movement came because for a long period of time, people ignored it. They said it's okay, and they just let it be, and it grew and grew until it exploded. And now we have so many stories of so many people who've been abused, who should not have ever been abused, who shouldn't have been treated the way they were treated, and they're coming forward now, story after story after story. It's terrible.
Yes.
So with these experiences, what are some of the things that you've learned can be done to overcome some of these different things? Because we're in a world right now where we're more diverse than ever. People
Yes.
come from all over the place. People go all over the place. And I'd love to hear both sides of the experience. As someone who's an employer, how are you able to make the workplace diverse? And also as someone who's an employee who's had to face all of the different diversity problems, how do you go about overcoming that?
So I believe that there's a lot that leaders can do. But the first and foremost thing is to acknowledge that this is an issue, and that it actually exists, and that just checking off and hitting your diversity goals has nothing to do with inclusivity.
Explain that one really quick, because I have a
Well,
feeling you've got something really incredible
because,
to say about this.
yeah, well, because just because you have a certain percentage of Middle Easterns or a certain percentage of Latinos and a certain percentage of Black Americans in your company does not mean that you're inclusive or diverse. I mean, it's just a number, right? And we all know that numbers are just for show. So, I mean, if the change does not come from the top, from the leadership, then there's nothing that HR department or inclusivity department can do. So I believe that a lot has to be done in terms of cultural and diversity training. Because yes, you can bring all these people together under one roof, but then what? You're not just hiring a person, you're hiring someone that comes with a whole belief system, all these cultures, norms, customs and different perspectives and ideas. And it will be challenging to adapt, and not just for the people that you're hiring, but for the people that are already existing in the company. So you have to have some sort of cross-cultural communication training, and help them learn and grow and have these conversations in which people do want to learn about other cultures. Because I was actually in a workspace and I felt that I was walking on eggshells, because everyone was worried about what I would say to offend people that are here, but nobody took a minute to ask me what offended me, or to learn about my culture or my background or my customs. And when I decided to have a cultural and diversity training, people were uncomfortable about that, which is weird, because, I mean, don't you want to learn about other cultures? And they actually didn't want, a lot of people didn't attend the training because they didn't want to be associated with what other people thought about that. They were worried about what other people will think about them for attending the training. So it's weird, and a lot has to be done in this area.
Absolutely. And I I can somewhat understand the fear behind it, because you could raise your hand and say, I'm going to this training, but some people could also have the perception that that means that you're not well, you don't understand cross-culture people well, you don't communicate cross-culturally well, you might be some sort of bigot, and you might have been forced to come to this because of that. And that I could see being a scary situation for somebody. But with that being said, that doesn't mean that people shouldn't be going. That means that as a culture, we need to create a space where we can allow people to go to these things and not
Yes.
feel like they're some sort of terrible person, because they're not. This is just information that we all need.
Yeah,
And
that was my next point.
exactly. And from a corporate perspective, I could see this would be good for everybody. And so I think what a lot of corporations tend to do is they send individuals to do things just for them. And sometimes it's because it's disciplinary. But instead of doing that, we need to allow all of our people that we're leading to partake in things like this, which will be beneficial to everybody, instead of mandating specifically each challenge as they come up. Does that make sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense. Actually, leaders have a responsibility to create this safe environment in where these topics can be discussed without any sensitivities or judgment, where people can communicate and learn and grow from one another.
Absolutely. If you can't provide safety for the people that are a part of your team, if you don't give them the room to grow and you don't give them the room to thrive, you're not really living up to your what you're supposed to do as a leader.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's true.
So it's important to have these discussions. It's important to have people trained in these areas. What is it exactly that we're training people in these areas? What is it that they're supposed to be understanding? How does that actually look?
They're supposed to understand how to communicate with people from different backgrounds, and to understand that people are used to doing things in a certain way in their own culture. And, they have their own customs. And then you come here and you ask them to do things completely differently. And sometimes this can create miscommunications. People will think that, oh, you're just trying to do things to be difficult. But no, we're just used to doing something in a different way. And, if you took the time to sit and talk to that individual and learn about them and their backgrounds, you'll understand a lot more,
Absolutely. And what's really interesting about that is that's not just a cross-cultural problem. It's definitely more apparent cross-culturally. But this happens within the same culture. That's why they create tests like the DISC, which is what we use in the John Maxwell team. And tests like that allow you to see how different people tend to communicate, lets you see how they interact with others, and allow you to see how you need to communicate to impact that person. And using tools like that, I could see being extremely beneficial, not just within the same culture, but cross-culturally as well.
Yeah, because it also teaches you empathy. You understand and you can see where a person comes from. And that small effort makes a huge difference to people.
Absolutely. And empathy, sadly, it's like a dying art form. And it's something that's so important. I mean, emotional intelligence and EQ is considered a higher determination of success than IQ. And
yes.
So much of EQ is empathy.
Yes. And you can have all the charisma in the world, all the knowledge, but if you don't have the emotional intelligence to work with your team and your colleagues, then it won't really matter, because you're going to drive them all away at some point.
Absolutely. And that's the last thing you need if you're trying to develop a dream team. Because with
Exactly.
a dream team, you need high quality individuals. You need people who are standing out, being up in front of people, wanting to fight for the business. And if you're pushing them all away, you'll destroy your dream team and they'll go work for your competitor and create a dream team over there against you.
Yes, that's true.
Definitely. What else goes into some of these trainings?
Um, I feel like a lot of leaders tend to focus on the negative side when they think of diversity. So they think of how difficult it is, how all these miscommunications can happen, when you should actually be thinking of all the advantages of having a diverse team, you know? So not only does it make great business sense to better understand people and your clients, your customers from all around the world, but it actually creates a more enriching and interesting work environment. And that should be used. People don't talk about that enough. I mean, they just talk about when they're trying to hit diversity goals, which I mentioned earlier, but it's way more than that.
Dive into that deeper for me. What about it is way more?
So let's say you're tackling a tough problem, okay, and you're open to new perspectives from different, to talk to people from different cultural backgrounds, and you take, instead of taking the approach that you always use, you ask someone that probably has more experience in this area, but in their own cultural background. You know, you'll probably find solutions to problems in ways that you never have thought of before. And if you just be open to that experience, it can change a lot of things for you in your business.
Definitely. Within your experience, is there a time where you've had an example that did or could have changed a company because of your cross-culture knowledge?
Um, I mean, it definitely helps me relate to other people because I know what it's like coming from a different culture and having sort of this wall that people build. I don't know if they don't really intentionally feel that they're doing it, but it exists and we feel it. So I feel like I can relate to others more. So there's so many times when people try to speak up that others just block them and they don't even want to listen. So I will take the time, I'll go and I'll talk to them and I'll listen, and sometimes I can just pass the message.
Definitely. And that's such an important skill for someone on a team to have. As a leader, you should be working on developing it, but even if you're not fantastic at it, you need to have someone who can do that because it allows you to hear the voices that aren't heard.
Right.
And what I know is that often the voices that aren't heard are the ones that know the real problems that are going on.
Oh, yes. I agree. But most times they don't feel safe enough to voice these problems. And that's a leadership issue. If you are not creating that environment where your people feel safe enough to come to you with these problems, then it's just not a healthy working environment.
Definitely. I remember I had a client and he was looking to connect with his team better. And he was asking me to help him with this. And I remember one of the first meetings we were having, I was talking through him with the situation and talking about how it should be played and stuff to this effect. And I remember he was standing there like this, right? Well, he was sitting there like this, laid back in his chair, arms super crossed. He like his face was like, I don't want to be here right now. And I knew him and I knew that wasn't his personality. But what he was showing was very different. And I told him, hey, when
Yes.
you do that, when you look very tense, when your face is closed off like that, when your arms are crossed like this, do you understand that what you're telling me is that you don't want to hear from me, that what I'm saying doesn't matter to you, and that you're just waiting to respond with whatever you want to say? And he was like, what?
Yes, you're not listening.
He's like, what? I'm like, yeah, that's what you're telling me when you do that. And I know that's not who you are, but that is what you're telling every single employee that you have. And what he did after that was fantastic, because he opened himself up during meetings. He would lean forward and look like he was listening. And like that one small thing changed everything for him. People started talking. They were more open about their opinions. They weren't terrified of him because they had literally been terrified about him.
Yeah.
So where have you experienced something like that in everything that you've done, where you saw something where you're like, if you would have just changed that could have changed everything for you?
For me, or
for someone that you were working
with? Someone else.
Yeah, that you're working with.
Oh, so many times. I overheard a conversation between two people that I know, and one person was trying to explain something to someone, and it was a problem, and the other person was just straight up answering one word answers, and does not sound sensitive enough. And that other person just ended up being upset and walked away. And then I went to him and asked him, why were you talking like that? And he said, what do you mean? And he didn't even realize that he was talking in a way that made that other person upset. And he was just not empathetic. And it was actually not the first time that that person did that. And I noticed it a few times, but the problem is this person is not open to change. He is sort of the defensive person, where you point out something and they get defensive and they sort of blame you, because God forbid there's anything ever wrong with them, But then people that are like this make things so much harder for themselves without even realizing it. And that's an issue, because especially in a business where you're a coach, people do not want to approach you anymore if this is how you're going to act and behave. And it's just sad, because if you have the potential to change people's lives, then at least give them the respect to treat them in a way, that will make them want to come back to you.
Absolutely. So what I'm understanding from that is that one of the things leaders need to be doing is being open to the idea that they're not perfect.
Oh, yes. That every day is the learning experience, every situation, but you just have to be accepting of that.
Absolutely. And knowing that someone else may have a perspective that can allow you to become better.
Yes. Because you can't see the whole frame when you're in the picture.
I love that. You can't see the whole frame when you're on the picture. I've never heard that one. That's brilliant.
Yeah, because sometimes all you need is a fresh pair of eyes, a new perspective. And when you're stuck in your bubble and you're like, I am so great, and, there's nothing wrong with me, then you can't really see anything that could be wrong with you.
Exactly. And that's usually when you have the most wrong things in front of you that you could have. Right.
And it's a problem when you're a leader, because this is what people are seeing,
Definitely.
And you're supposed to be their role model.
Exactly. And not just as a leader, but within the terms of diversity, it's a problem. Because if you
Right.
think your way is the only right way, when you see your beliefs as the only correct beliefs, you shut out possibilities that could be much better than yours that you just haven't had your eyes open to yet.
Oh, yeah. If you're creating a workplace where different perspectives and ideas or values embraced and respected, then it can go a long way to foster productive business relationships. Whether you're in a junior role, whether you're a manager or a director, or just actively seeking advice or ideas or opinions, it's going to improve communication, and it's going to create and foster this cross-cultural environment. And this inclusive culture will actually retain a diverse workforce. And it's going to make your workplace more attractive to, let's say, global minded job seekers, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually really important because one of the big challenges we face today is how do we maintain people? How do we keep people in our organizations? It's one of the things we just talked about with Jeff Woods, and he had a fantastic perspective on that. And in order to keep people within your organization, you need to, what he said, allow your world to be expanded by theirs.
Yes, exactly. I love that. A lot of leaders don't realize that they are the problem people are leaving. They're constantly in denial about that. But I'm sure you heard the term, people don't leave organizations, they leave bosses.
It's true, and it's completely true. One of the most fun facts that I've heard, statistics, not facts. One of the most fun statistics that I've heard is that 58% of people trust a complete stranger more than their own boss.
Which is crazy.
58% of people would trust someone that may be an axe murderer for all they know over their own boss who they spend 40 hours a week with.
And see, if you don't have that trust, then you don't have anything.
Exactly. You have people that'll do the minimums just to keep the job until they're able to attain something else.
Right.
Or even worse, you'll have someone who's not very good who will stay in the job because they know they can keep it.
Right. But they don't actually care about it, and their productivity levels are all the way down, which is something very sad. And one of the reasons I decided to become a coach is because you go in to a company with all these like goals and ideas, and you're very motivated, and a boss like that, someone toxic, just takes that all from you just because they don't know how to behave and act like a leader is supposed to do and be. And it's just very sad.
Definitely, I agree. And I would say that what a leader needs to do is first ask the question, how am I contributing to that problem? It's a question we don't ask very often because we see the problem and we say, there's the problem, get the problem, someone fix it. But we never say, how am I at fault for that problem?
That in situations like this, leaders are mostly in denial because they will blame the employees and they'll never see themselves as the issue.
Exactly. And so
employees leave, they'll just hire other ones in their place. And then the same thing happens over and over again.
Exactly. And so in order to be effective, what the leader has to do is first ask how am I the problem? And that gives them the opportunity to grow so that they can overcome those challenges. And if the challenge is diversity, they're trying to create a more diverse culture, get more input from different people, and they're not getting it. They're seeing the same types of applicants come over and over again. They're not hiring different people in diversity. The first thing that they should be asking is, how am I contributing to this?
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Absolutely. So moving on from here, what else should be, what else does go into these cross-cultural trainings?
So you have to understand that communication techniques are differently. We have people that are very open to communicating, and we have people that sort of are afraid of communications. As in, I can't remember specifically the word, but a lot of people just decide to take orders straight up, not confront their managers. And we see a lot of that in the Asian cultures. And then you have people in the American culture, which is very different in their communications. And that kind of causes issues between two cultures, especially when a company is trying to be more diverse. And that requires a lot of training.
Absolutely, because every culture has slightly different ways, which are the quote unquote norm for communication. Yes. And if you don't understand what that norm is in another culture, it's very easy to unintentionally be disrespectful to that person's culture and to make them feel like they're disrespected. And once they feel like they're disrespected, you lose their trust very quickly.
And not just that, it causes frustrations, because a lot of people are like, why are you doing things this way? And why aren't you doing it the way we're supposed to be doing it, And they don't know that that's the way they're supposed to be doing it, because that's how they were taught to do it. But that's another thing to be discussed. There should not be one right way. A lot of people are used to, let's just do this as an A, B, and C. But why can't it be C, B, and A, for example? There's a lot of things that can be changed that don't have to be either black or white. And people that are used to a certain system get frustrated when things are different. But then you have to adapt. You have to learn to adapt to different situations and different cultures. And that's another thing that has to be taught. Flexibility.
Absolutely. And along that, I remember that when I was in the corporate world, there was a point where I was being let go because my company was being combined with another company, and the other company was taking full control of everything. They had my position within their company in India. And so the workforce there is significantly cheaper than the one in the United States. So all of our jobs were going over to the people in India. With that, we had to train the entire team in India to take over our jobs, which already is a really fun situation. However, as we started training them, we realized that they had a way of doing business which was significantly different than the way we were doing business. And in order to get through to them, we had to make changes in how we communicated. There was differences in how to go through the chain of command, and there were differences in how to reach out to different clients. And we also had to teach them how to reach out to clients that we had, because they were used to doing it their way. However, within the way we communicated with our clients, it a whole different cultural thing going on. And what they were doing was very distasteful to most of the clients we had. There were a few times where they would reach out and then the clients would unloop them and then loop one of us back in to the conversation and be like, hey, this kind of happened and this isn't right. And we're like, we're not really doing this job anymore, but we'll communicate with them what needs to happen. And
Oh boy.
because we weren't allowed really to be doing that job anymore. It was basically our full-time
Right.
job to train them. And so we basically had to teach how the communication is different. And it's not an easy transition, but it's one that has to be made if you're going to have long-term success.
And people have to understand that things like this take time, especially someone that's used to doing something like this pretty much all their lives. And you have to be patient with them. And I'm not saying that, yes, just let them do whatever and, accept it. No, but understand that, like you said, it's a transition. And like it was hard for you, it's hard for them too. But they have to acknowledge there is a difference and not just ignore it, because that's the beginning of the problems.
Absolutely. And yeah, no, it's frustrating definitely on both sides, because there were definitely times during that period where we were having backs and forths with people, and then like our original team was all like, gosh, why does this keep happening? And we know they were saying the same thing about us. Yes. And like we had to work a lot to get past those different things so that we could work together really well. Because it just wasn't there right away. Anytime you have that major cultural difference, it's going to take used to getting through to each other.
Mm-hmm. And then you have things like time difference,
Oh my goodness. Now, the one nice thing for us was, and it made me feel really terrible for them, was that they were used to working through the middle of the night. Like that was their norm. So they would get to work at like 9:00 p.m. their time and would be there till like 5:00 in the morning their time. And that was normal for them. Like that was normal for them. They'd been doing that for years and years and years. And I was like, wow, like I would not want to have that job, but you guys, like, this is your normal. I have so much respect, but I also feel so sad at the same time.
Yeah. And like, see, if they came here to the States and they had what you would call normal, it would be so hard for them.
Exactly. And they'd be like, wow, these Americans are nuts the way they do it.
Right? It's all about thinking and seeing things from the other person's perspective. Like being in their shoes, walking in their shoes, as opposed to just thinking of myself,
Absolutely. So within that, how do we get better at doing that?
By listening. That's the first step. Listening. People just want to hear themselves talk, and they're just ready to reply and respond and attack. People get very defensive very quickly. And unfortunately, I used to be like that. I used to just want to respond. But then as I got older, I realized that, because I'm not the most patient person, I realized that I have to learn to be more patient. I have to listen more instead of just like waiting for them to be quiet so that I can quickly respond and, like have my really smart ass response. But it takes time and it's very difficult. But listening is the key.
Absolutely. And it's sadly not something that's taught very often and not taught very well either.
It's not taught at all in many organizations.
Exactly. So what are some of the keys to making that actually work out?
To listening?
Mm-hmm.
Well, allowing people to see things from other people's perspective, just showing them, maybe living a day in that person's life, training, talking about issues. Because like I said, a lot of people don't like discussing things that make them uncomfortable, but then growth is not comfortable. But you still have to put an effort to learn and communicate with others. Because if you don't ask people about, let's say, how they do things, about their problems, about their issues, you're never going to learn why they do things in a certain way. And if you don't take the time to listen, then you're never going to get anywhere. So that's just one of the first steps.
Definitely. One of the things I heard within that was that you need to understand it from their perspective. So
Right.
often we listen, we quote unquote listen, I'll say, and we hear the words they say, but we don't look at it from their perspective. We put our perspective on top of it.
Right. And we just want to respond.
Exactly. And what I believe one of the big keys to overcoming that is to, once you hear the words they say back to them, based on what you said, I believe this is what you're saying. Or like, I believe this is what you're trying to tell me.
Yes. And that makes them see and hear that you are actually listening to what they said and you heard them.
Exactly.
And that will actually make them want to talk more to you. They'll see you as more approachable.
Exactly. On top of that, if you didn't understand them the way they thought they had communicated, it gives them the opportunity to say, no, that's not what I said, or no, that's not what I meant. And they can explain it in a new way,
Right.
to hopefully bridge that gap.
That's correct.
Definitely. Now, along with this, some of the other things you were saying in that, you need to listen to understand their perspective. What were some of the other things you said in there?
Just, well, I don't think I said that, but I will say it now. Just take the time to appreciate the differences instead of always finding a problem with it.
Mm.
Because I feel like that's a huge thing that people don't really think about. And it's very, very important, especially in a world that's become so diverse in business and in general. The differences are what make each individual unique. It's what makes you you. And instead of just attacking people that are different, try and understand them more. Try and take the time to get to know them. It changes everything.
I love that, because we don't appreciate enough in life, period. And
Right.
it's not just people that we don't appreciate. We don't appreciate where we are in life. We don't appreciate the experiences we've had. We don't appreciate what we do have already. There's a lack of appreciation of everything, and there's a high level of dissatisfaction with everything because of that.
Yeah.
And it has contributed to this whole keeping up with the Joneses contest that we're all a part of, and it's had some really devastating results that have come from it. And if we would just sit back and say, like, I appreciate where I am. I appreciate where they are. I appreciate that they're on a learning journey and they want to be learning, because most people want to learn. They want to get better. They don't want to be awful and terrible. They want to actually do something well, and they want to be recognized for it. And you can stop and appreciate, hey, this person may have made a mistake, but they want to do better. You can appreciate that in someone.
Right. I feel like it's this constant comparison with what we see in social media, life, and everything is out there now. It makes it so hard. it really is difficult because we all have our problems, right? And sometimes it's just so hard to see anything but those problems. And so if you just take a minute, take a deep breath, think about all the good things, and just maybe find someone that would listen. Again, listening is very important.
Absolutely. And within that, you can learn a lot about another culture when you are looking to appreciate things about that culture.
Exactly.
Because so often we just look for what are the differences, and we typically skew towards what we believe are the negative differences. But if you're looking for that appreciation, you could say, wow, that's actually something really awesome that they're doing well versus what we seem to be doing. For instance, one of the things you said was in your hometown's culture, it's normal for people to be paid the same. It's normal for women to be in positions of power. That's awesome. And it's not something where it's very audibly that we're not experiencing here very well in the United States. And if we took a minute and say, wow, we can appreciate that, we can now stop and say, wow, how are they doing that?
Right. And for me, just hearing that this is not normal here is not normal for me, you know? So it was very hard for me to move from that to this. I mean, I kept hearing it like in social media, on Twitter, when I was in grad school, but I never really understood or felt it until I had to live it and experience it myself.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a huge difference between the idea of it and the experience of it.
Hmm. It's an eye opener for sure.
Definitely. And what I would tag along with that is that most people, when they think cross culturally, only have an idea of the other culture. They don't have the experience of the other culture. And because the idea and the experience are different, if they would allow themselves to gain an experience with the other culture, then it could completely change your mindset about that culture, which would allow more diversity.
Yeah, and that's another thing is that a lot of people are afraid of anything that's different from them. And they just see it as, no, we're doing it right, you're doing it wrong. But why does it have to be either right or wrong? It's just their way of living and your way of living, you know?
Absolutely. Sometimes it's not black and white. Sometimes there's different levels of gray. And you may discover that some levels of
Right,
gray,
exactly.
yeah, and sometimes you may discover some levels of gray work better, and sometimes you may discover that some levels of gray work not as well. But that doesn't mean that
Right,
they're
exactly.
not working, and that doesn't mean that there's not a time and place for the different levels of gray.
And perhaps they may be working for one culture but not for the other. There's so many different things.
Exactly. Yeah, your tactics may work perfectly here, but as soon as you try and hit a different culture, as soon as you try to expand into another culture, all of a sudden those tactics don't work anymore. And that actually happens to a lot of businesses.
Oh, yes.
Recently, I know like Google, Facebook, a lot of these big tech companies have been having major challenges getting into China. Why? Because China has a completely different culture than most of the rest of the world. And China is basically banning these companies from coming in.
Yes. That's very interesting because I did work with someone that came from another country and they came in wanting to do business the way they've done it in their country. And I kept trying to explain to them that it can't be done this way. but they just refused to listen to anything I would say. They just shut their ears off and they were like, no, we're going to do it this way and it's going to work. And their way was just, let's give out all the business cards in the world and we're going to get business that way. This is not how it works. You have to sit, you have to take your time, you have to build relationships with people. And they were wondering why we had difficulties getting American clients. Well, I was trying to explain to you why, but you wouldn't listen. And so that's another thing about having to be open about learning from other people. Every culture has its own way of doing business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I can tell you for a fact, most people in the United States barely understand. Well, it's not that they don't understand, it's that they barely utilize a business card. They'll get a huge stack of business cards, kind of like this right here that I've got right next to me, but they'll never actually look at anyone within the stack of business cards. Now, I'm an oddball compared to the majority of people in the United States, where I keep the business cards and I'll go through the business cards. But most people won't do that. Those business cards for most people in the United States will be gone by the next day. Someone will be like reaching in their pockets and they're like, huh, what's this? Oh, it's a business card? I don't need this. And then it's gone.
Yeah. And like for me, it has to be a conversation where someone was memorable for me to want to reach out to them, not someone that just gave me a business card, because that can be anyone. Why would I want to do business with you? You have to make me want to be interested in you and your business, you as a person before your business.
Exactly. And that's not true of every culture, right? In some cultures, if you try to come forward and you're like trying to make them your best friend right away, and you haven't talked anything business, they'll immediately freak out and think you're like a terrible business person, and they'll shut you out.
Exactly. So you have to know who you're dealing with.
Absolutely. And so many businesses fail when they're trying to grow and expand because they or their team or both don't know how to work in the other places.
And some people don't know. They refuse to change their methods because they believe that, okay, this is how we do it and this is how it's always going to be done. But it's not going to work that way.
And in saying that, they're committing one of the worst things you can do in a business. It's in saying that this is the way it will always be done. When you have that mindset, your business is automatically doomed to fail. Your team is automatically doomed to fail. You
Exactly.
are automatically doomed to fail. I mean, look at you see this in sports. Everyone's got a plan before they get into the game, but as soon as they get in the game, what happens? They call changes throughout it, right? In baseball, right, the catcher calls out the different signs for the pitcher to change what pitch they're going to use for that time. And it changes every single time the pitcher pitches. In football, you've got quarterbacks that'll call the play, and sometimes the defense will line up and they'll call an audible. Why? Because something has changed and a change needs to be done right then. And if they don't make those changes, things typically turn out for the worst.
Right. In order for you to be successful, you have to be adaptable. You have to be flexible.
Exactly. And you said flexibility earlier is so important. So how does one become more flexible?
Again, you start by listening. Listening is key. You have to also understand that there's no such thing as my way or the highway in business. And I'm saying this because as an individual, I used to be like that. My way or the highway. I was so stubborn. I'm still stubborn in some things, but but again, as you grow older, you learn that this is not how life works. And if you're not adaptable, you're never going to make it.
Absolutely. It's adaptability is another one of those traits that we seem to be losing in our culture, I feel. It's one where people become very self-righteous. And in that self-righteousness, they actually doom themselves from being able to do the things they're trying to do.
And you know why? I feel it's because people see it as a competition. As in, like, if you're adaptable, then you lost. But you're actually losing by not being adaptable.
Absolutely. It makes me think of a concept that I learned from Simon Sinek, which is the finite game versus the infinite game. And in the finite game, there's a beginning and there's an end, there's a winner and there's a loser. But in the infinite game, there is no end, there are no winners and losers. In the finite game, there's a strategy that you play to and then the strategy wins. In the infinite game, the strategy will continually change from the beginning all the way through.
Depending on the situation.
Exactly. Because no strategy works forever. If you're playing a finite game, you can have a strategy that works to the end of that game. But if you're trying to create something that far exceeds that, if you're trying to create something that's legendary, if you're trying to create a dream team, you can't have the exact same formula work perfectly every single time. You need that flexibility.
That's true. And that's the same thing for a leader. You can't work with everyone the same way. You have to understand that everyone is motivated differently. Like if someone is motivated by a promotion, that doesn't mean that that's how your whole team is going to be motivated by, you know?
Yeah.
You
Some people, there are people who see promotions as a terrible thing. They see the idea of getting more power as just a hassle, that getting more responsibility is just going to give them a headache. And so you don't want to put that person in a position of leadership. And I say a position of leadership because there's a difference between a position and being a leader. They could be a leader where they are, but you don't want to put them in a positional leadership area because they don't want to do that and they're not going to succeed there. And we actually do that a lot. I don't know, like, if where you come from, if they do this, but I know this happens a lot in the United States where people are promoted not based on the skills needed for that promotion, but they're promoted based on how well they've done their job before.
That's why we have leadership problems, because a lot of people are not qualified to be leaders, and then they have to lead others.
And they're not giving any sort of training. They're not giving any sort of understanding of how to do it well. And they're just left swimming without a paddle, right? And they, when the waterfall comes, they fall down in the waterfall and drown.
I think you cut off a second there.
Oh, no worries. So continuing on from here, what else are we missing from this whole discussion that you feel like we should be touching upon?
I feel like a lot of people wait for something to happen to change their lives. And I feel like that's very, very important to discuss. And for me, I've always been an ambitious person. I've always been someone that is self-motivated. And people didn't always agree with what I said and what I believed. Well, sometimes they still don't. But I mean, it is up to you to decide whether that is a deterrent to you, your goals and your beliefs and your dreams, or to whether you keep shooting for the stars. And I think that that is something worth talking about and mentioning, because I feel like nowadays people tend to forget that and they tend to settle, which as a coach, I find very sad because I really do want to help people get there, reach their full potential, especially when you see someone with a lot of potential.
Absolutely. And this works in two different ways, because a lot of leaders are facing that, where they're kind of just settling and they're just allowing whatever happens to happens, and they hope something outside of them will allow things to change. However, it's not just the leader that's facing this, but every other person that they're leading is also facing this. They're hoping that someone outside of them will make things change, that this, whatever circumstances will allow things to change. And when they don't, they lose hope. And so as the leader, you have to be the model. You have to be the person that stands forward in order to create that dream team. You have to be the one that says, I'm going to make things change. And if you want to see things change, I need you to stand up too.
Yes.
And so if you want to see more diversity in your team, the first thing you need to do as a leader is stand up and say, I'm going to figure out what I need to do for diversity to be allowed. And as I'm doing this, I want you guys to do it too.
Yeah, because diversity is not just about people from different backgrounds. It's about a diversity of ideas and perspectives. And people have to see that just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean that you're wrong, doesn't mean that we can't work well together. That's how you create a diverse team. You have people with all these different ideas, perspectives, and perhaps different goals that you can work together as a team to achieve everyone's goals and the organization's goals.
Absolutely. And that's so key, that it's not just about your goals. It's not just about the organizational roles, and it's not just about any other individual's goals. It's about how do all of our goals tie together? Because
Exactly.
in doing that, you are able to accomplish all of the goals
By having a common goal.
Exactly. And that is something that I think is lost in a lot of leadership, is not having a diversity of understanding of goals. They say, like, our goal is to reach X amount in revenue, right?
Yes.
But that doesn't motivate an individual to reach that goal. And so you tell them, I need you to make X amount of sales so we can hit this mark. And they're going like, okay, I've got to make this many sales. But they're at home and things are challenging and there are all these problems going on. And, they recently got in a car accident and they spilled coffee on themselves in the morning. And, they're like, gosh, I don't care about the sales. I care about all these other things that are going on, and they don't focus on getting the company results done. But as a leader, if you were to look at that individual and realize that their goal is to get a boat, we'll say that's what it is, right? Now you can connect their goal of getting a boat to the company goal. Well, we need this much in sales for the company to succeed. If you want your boat, this is what you're going to need to contribute in sales to make the money to get the boat. And that is going to help us reach the goal of the business. Now they have a reason that's meaningful to them. And by diversifying what that goal is and getting an understanding of the diversity of goals, they can get everyone on the same page to actually get to where everyone wants to get to. The business gets where it wants to get to. You help them get their boat, which is what they want. You have led them successfully, which is what you want. And everyone wins.
Because as a leader, you have to think, why would I care about your goal if you don't care about mine? You know?
Exactly. And that's what most people are asking, right? And it's not just goals. They say, if you don't care about me, why should I care about you?
Exactly. And that's another important thing to remember is that, like a few years ago, all people cared about is a salary. And of course, people still care about salaries now, but then they have much more important things on mind, and they're more aware of what they want and what they don't want. And as a leader, you have to know that they're more prepared to walk away from you if you are not on the same page and if you don't understand that. It's no longer just about money.
Exactly. Because in the short term, money will motivate, but in the long term, money means very little to people. The only thing most people care about money for is what will the money get them to.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can take money away as the motivating factor and you can give them motivation in some other form that's meaningful to them, then you help them overcome that.
Of course. Yeah, it makes all the difference.
Exactly. And on top of this, different people in different cultures are motivated differently too.
Of course, yes. And leaders have to be aware of that.
Exactly. Like for instance, and I'm just thinking, while you were going through your fasting period, any sort of thing that would have been like for food would have been a deterrent for you. Right? So if you had a leader during that time where they're like, if everyone gets to this goal, we're going to have a pizza party, right? Which I've had bosses do that, right? That sounds great. However, if you're fasting and you're not allowed to eat, that's demotivating. You're like, great, I'm contributing. Yeah, I'm contributing to something that means nothing to me.
Absolutely.
And on top of that, you probably find it offensive, right? You're like, sheesh, you don't care about my beliefs enough to do something that'll be inclusive for me.
Yes, and that's interesting because a lot of people want you to sort of like be adaptable to them, but then they don't really think about you. Because during that time, I had a lot of people that were like, let's have a lunch meeting. Let's have a breakfast meeting. And I'm like, well, I'm fasting. And they're like, well, can't you fast another day? And I'm like, that's not how it works. And I'm like, just look it up, read about it, like inform yourself. It doesn't take that much of an effort because I do that for people. And I don't think it's too much to expect the same from them in return.
And that's how leaders need to be thinking, right? If they want people to adapt to their plan, to adapt to the business goals, to be adaptive in general, they need to understand other people and be able to adapt to what works for them as well. Exactly.
It's a two-way effort. You have to meet me halfway. I'm not going to walk the bridge alone.
Exactly. And so often people in general kind of are pointing and say, go that way. But then it looks terrifying. And if you're the leader saying go that way, the person you're leading is like, are you just telling me to go that way because you don't want to go that way? And you want someone else to do it for you?
Right.
And then what happens? You lose trust.
That's the first step. I mean, people don't realize that it's the small things that make all the difference.
And that's so important.
That is,
Yeah, it's the small things that you do that are going to either lead to your success or your failure in developing a dream team, in becoming more diverse, in getting to the goals you have. If you're not doing the small things right, you're not going to be able to accomplish the big things.
because the small things will lead to the big things. You have to start small.
Exactly. Absolutely. It's the domino effect. You hit the small domino first and it's able to knock over the next biggest domino, then the next biggest domino, and it continues on from there.
Right.
Now within that, within everything that we've said, what do you think is the absolute most important portion of becoming more diverse with teams?
I think it's being open and accepting and understanding that just because something is different doesn't mean it's wrong and doesn't mean it's against you. It means that perhaps they're trying and putting all their efforts to be a part of something new. And you just have to allow it to happen and open your arms instead of pushing it or building a wall between you two, because not everything that's different is wrong.
Absolutely. And not everything that's different is part of a war, right?
Exactly.
And in fact, most people aren't trying to fight at all, right? Most people hate fighting.
Most people just want to belong.
Absolutely. And they're looking for that. And as the leader, if you can create a team where people feel like they belong, where they feel like they can be heard, where they feel safe, they're not going to ever want to leave, because they know most of the other places they could end up going to won't make them feel that way, especially when we're talking cross-culturally, because they know the stigmas that are going to be attached when they go somewhere else, because they know that someone's not going to understand their traditions, because they feel like they're not going to get heard because of how they look or because of whatever other factor. And if you want them to come to you, and if you want them to stay with you, it's so important for you to create that environment.
People just want to be appreciated for their efforts and for giving you their time, you know? So just take it day by day. You're not going to learn everything about a culture at once. It's going to take time. You'll have to be patient. And it's a two-sided thing. Both people, both individuals, both cultures have to be open. It's not just one person being like, hey, accept me, you know? It's something
Exactly.
that has to work both ways. Otherwise, it's never
Absolutely.
going to work.
Exactly. And something that I think is really valuable in what you just said is that, sheesh, and I just lost it, and I was really enjoying that point. Don't you love when your mind goes blank like that? Maybe it'll come back to me. Hopefully it comes back to me. So, people want to be appreciated.
Yep.
because they are giving you their time. As a leader, what we need to recognize is that time is the most valuable resource in the world. And when people decide to be a part of your team and to stay a part of your team, they are utilizing the most valuable resource in their life. And a lot of times leaders look at the individual and they say, this person owes me because I'm paying them.
Yes.
However, they are paying you in their time, which is far more valuable than the dollar amount you're giving to them. And so you need to be appreciative of everything that they're giving to you because it far exceeds what you're giving to them.
Mm-hmm. And also another important thing that I forgot to mention is that you have to understand that when someone comes to work for you or like be a part of your team from different culture, don't try to change them to be someone that's from your culture. Appreciate the differences they bring and add to the table. You know, that's the point of being diverse.
Absolutely, 100%. And we are running at the end of our time, Aisha. It's been absolutely wonderful. And I understand that you've got a gift for everyone who's attended.
Yes, I have a complimentary 30-minute session, a coaching session, either in Zoom or a phone call.
That's truly, truly valuable, people, because one, coaching is probably the most needed thing in the world right now for most people. And two, she's offering it for free. And I know her services are worth a lot of money. And so that is extremely valuable. Aisha, thank you so much for everything. I've loved this conversation, and it's so needed in today's world because diversity is something we need. We need to have diversity in today's world because the boundaries in today's world are disappearing. They're non-existent almost at this point. You've got people that are able to work from everywhere, and the talent pool that exists outside of where you are located right now is extremely high sometimes. And you need those different perspectives. You need those different people to really help your team get to the furthest possibilities that are in existence for you, your organization, and your team. And
100%.
what was that?
I said 100% agree with you.
Thank you.